persona o institución que los emite.
Ahora empieza su programa, el show del Dr. Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas noches, queridos televidentes. Good evening, my viewers, dear esteemed viewers. Esta noche vamos a hacer el show en inglés. Today we're doing the show in English. As I mentioned last time that we were here, once a month I'll be doing the show in English. Una vez al mes haremos el show en inglés, and once a month we'll be doing the show in Spanish. So I have the hopes, tengo la esperanza que los televidentes que dominan más el español se les antoje un poco aprender unas cuantas palabritas más en inglés para seguir el show. I hope that those who are dominant in either English or Spanish, you pick up a little bit of the other language. That's my hope and my intention. So today the show is in English. Hoy el show, como digo, está en inglés. La próxima semana, next week, the 28th of March, the show will be in Spanish. La próxima semana, el 28 de marzo, estaremos en español. Next week, I will have as a guest a very illustrious, super published individual, Dr. Antonio Puente, who, for me to give you all of his credentials, would take the entire show, and probably even more than that. But he's a past president of the American Psychological Association. Él fue el Dr. Antonio Puente, presidente de la Asociación de Psicólogos de los Estados Unidos, and he has been president of many, many, many more organizations. He's authored multiple articles and books, and together we will be talking, vamos a tocar tema de tragedias. We're going to be talking about natural disasters and tragedies that happen in light of some of the horrific tornadoes that have taken place in Alabama and the Midwest. And certainly we're hitting the hurricane season, and we've also had devastating fires in California. But also human-made disasters, including the horrific event that took place in New Zealand. So we're going to talk about the psychological consequences of natural and human-made tragedies. Today I have two also very distinguished guests. And I wanted to introduce you to the topic of today. Today's topic is legal and forensic issues in child and adolescent psychology. And I have as guests my dear friend Dr. Robin Lynch, who I've known, must be 10 years?
10 years, I think anyway,
10 years. Robin is a well-established forensic psychologist, and she has held many positions in the New York State Psychological Association. I met her through the forensic division. So, I invited her to come today because she certainly has a tremendous wealth of knowledge in this area. And here, actually, may I say that you're a neighbor?
Yes.
Not only is he like right next to me, but he's a neighbor of mine, 2 houses away from where I live. I hope I didn't give that away.
Okay.
But Jorge Rosario, he is an attorney for Suffolk County Legal Aid Society, and probably a little bit shy, but I did want to show you. I don't know if you can do a close-up of this, Oscar, but he is absolutely distinguished himself, serving the country. And I wanted just to point out that he was recognized by New York State Senate Veterans Hall of Fame. So what I wanted to do is just, welcome both of you. And Robin, maybe you can say a couple of things about your practice, your type of work, and then Jorge, you'll say what you do as well, and then we'll open up the topic.
Oh, thank you, Roy. Good evening. And I would say that my specialty has really been in child custody. And when child custody conflicts come before the court, these are obviously the most contentious kind of thing that the family court can deal with. And a great deal has gone into trying to find ways to adjudicate these kinds of cases thoughtfully, with greater attention to the trauma often associated with them, the incidence of abuse, the level of addiction that can occur in families that are going through custody conflicts. So this has been my focus. It's not only working on these cases as my profession, but it's also I'm an advocate for trying to reform our work in this area. So thank you.
Okay, well that's very brief. Believe me, I've seen her CV, and it's not as long as Dr. Point is, but it's getting there. It's close. Jorge, why don't you tell us what you do?
I'm an attorney with the Suffolk County Legal Aid Society, Children's Law Bureau in particular, and the cases...
You're the bureau chief, I think.
Yes, I'm the bureau chief. And the cases we handle are custody, neglects, abuse cases, guardianships associated with SIDGE cases, with children that are traumatized and coming over to the United States mostly from Central America. We deal with juvenile delinquency cases.
So culture obviously is a big issue. We're dealing with cultural language barriers.
Absolutely.
Obviously we cater, significantly to Latinos, to the Hispanic population. But obviously we're a big, huge melting pot.
Yes.
And I'm sure you're seeing people from all sorts of walks of lives and different cultures that are coming.
Absolutely.
To the United States.
As was mentioned with the custody cases, they're difficult, right, because of the different trauma that the children may have, and sometimes that might be the parents doing at times as well, and so we have to deal with that. But I mostly deal with the legal aspects, and then we use expertise like yours to assist us and the court in trying to find out what is the best interest. Right, that's the standard, the legal standard that the court has to ultimately find.
Well, one of the reasons why I thought it was so important to have an expert psychologist and an attorney is that it's very difficult to just parcel out, what the law does versus what professional mental health experts do. There has to be like a marriage. I mean, attorneys have to have some ability to communicate with mental health specialists,
yes.
And the psychologists have to have an idea of what the law is. They obviously not a textbook knowledge of the law, but they have to understand what the requirements are to convince or to meet the standard for custody for one parent or not, or whether or not there's a determination made that a child has been legally abused or neglected or sexually molested, and other things that come to my mind, like the age of the child, like kind of 5-year-old testify as opposed to an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and things like getting to the truth, contaminating their memories, all sorts of things. I worked in child custody cases a long time ago, and I remember it was, oh my God, I was mortified. I would go to court. I would be nervous to death because I knew that I was going to be grilled by the attorney for the husband, the attorney for the wife, the legal guardian of the child, and it was very, very, very difficult. And somehow, people often they're at blows. Somebody's not happy. It was very, very, very difficult. So I do recall that. Just to open up and get this thing started, I did want to show Oscar, if you could put the first slide, because I wanted to let the viewers know that we're talking about a problem when we're dealing with issues, forensic issues and psychological issues pertaining to children and adolescents. It's not a small thing. I mean, if you look at the slide, we're looking at annually nearly 700,000 children are abused in the United States. I mean, this is incredible. An estimated a little bit less than 2,000 children died from abuse. This is like 2015, the most recent numbers that I was able to see. The most common form of maltreatment is neglect, and about 4 or 5 abusers are parents. So
you know what's the scary part about those numbers is that we all know that many children that are reported abused, but there are many that are not.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is an under.
It's a conservative or
absolutely
an underrepresentation.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Because you always need who's going to report, right? Maybe a teacher, a doctor, someone. So many times that's why we have those cases even now we find with the abuse in churches and other places, or coaches, or Penn State, or any of these other places that it's gone on for years. Yeah. So there's so many others that have not been reported.
We're also talking about certain terminology. So, Oscar, if you can put the second slide, I do want to have the viewers have an idea of what some of the terms mean. So here you see abuse, where the, feel free to chime in, and Robin. You have a parent or person who's legally responsible for the child inflicting serious physical injury. So the abuse, I think, on the spectrum is worse than neglect. I believe I'm correct.
Yes.
Or creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury, perhaps leaving a window with no window gates wide open and the child unsupervised, and you've got a hyperactive kid who might jump out the window. I mean, I would imagine that's serious.
It is serious, but the interesting is that the legal standard for abuse has to have an intent behind it.
Oh, okay. So
even though in a situation where a child falls out the window because somebody left something open that should have been supervised, that's a neglect.
Okay.
It may be reckless endangerment, maybe other types of things, but it's interesting that when it comes to abuse, you have to show some kind of intent.
Okay, so like somebody saying, why don't you cross the street knowing full well that the kid's going to get run over by a car?
Absolutely, because that's probably their intent is that they get run over by a car.
And obviously sexual offense against a child or allowing someone else to inflict harm on the child. And Oscar, if you could put the third slide. And this is neglect. Again, feel free to chime in. We're looking at physical, mental, or emotional condition of a child that in some way is impaired or placing them in danger of impairment by the failure of the parent or person legally responsible to exercise a minimum degree of care. So you're looking at things like malnutrition, medical conditions that aren't being tended to, improper dental care, lack of schooling, kids missing school
But there's an area there. There's an area there with neglect that's interesting. Both doctors and both of you would probably, I think, agree that it's something that the courts miss. When custody cases, if you have some parental alienation, at some point, many of us have been
What
arguing.
is parental alienation?
I'm sorry, out loud.
What is that? No, you brought up a wonderful word. But
it's
I only learned it a few days ago myself.
Parental alienation is an unfortunate concept that's worked its way into the issues of child custody, particularly. It's rooted in some science. It's not science. It's what I guess we would call sort of junk science. I could go into a little bit the detail of how this came about, but the fact that it took hold, regardless of the fact that it's been clearly shown that it is based on faulty data, to put it mildly, yet nonetheless, it remains a very powerful strategy for obtaining custody.
So it's being used as a tool.
It is used as a tool, and it's when one parent argues that the other parent is turning the children against them. Now, I mean, I'm not quite sure, Roy, if this is really what you're looking to discuss here. It is an issue that ends up being the tool of abusive people. In other words, if you are an abusive person, you really are somebody who's, when we define abuse psychologically, we define it as coercive control. You need to control the situation. You need to inflict pain, this kind of thing. If you are that type of person, it is abusers who will adopt that strategy. It is not to say that there's a certain amount of parent alienation that doesn't occur, in the sense that parents badmouth the other parent. And there's no question that that goes on probably both sides most of the time. Yes. Parents try to do their best, but when it is going on, what I've observed in my cases is a parent who's really interested in the best interest of their children will not bring it to the attention of the court. This I have found to be true time and again, because they know how damaging it is to the children. Yes. Any parent who would, I'm so glad to see you nodding on this, because yes. It's a controversial issue.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like you said, it's taken hold, and it's taken hold in the courts and everything else.
I've seen like the kids sometimes are used like pawns.
Yeah, well, there's so much, there's just so much to it, and this is why this topic is so important, the forensic. This is where we need the expertise, forensic expertise, because in a few court appearances, you can't figure out who's telling the truth.
Yes.
And many times sometimes you get a lot of good information from the children, sometimes of what they don't say, right? It depends, again, how
the nonverbal.
The nonverbal, how you pose a question, their reaction, because, they may, you get one parent saying, they're alienating me. But then you start if the case goes on long enough, you start figuring out, right?
The case has to go on for a while.
Yes, because
and they often rush these cases, and you really can't see what's going on in that limited time.
And I'm sure you've seen that. Yeah. You know that the parent that is alleging the alienation is actually doing it to themselves, because they really don't understand parenting too well. And it's okay. It's a difficult thing. But so when a child says, "I want to do this, I want to do that," no, your mother wants you to. Your mother's saying that. Well, the child is saying that. You see how they'll twist it.
How much of a red flag is it when you have a child? And it's a two-part question. When you have a child who will who made a complaint and then retracts the complaint. That's part one. And part two may be a young child who suddenly begins to verbalize things that seem to be almost like they were taught this, or that they vocabulary level is not what you would expect. How much of a red flag is that, and is that something you see often? Question, both of you.
Well, I would say that those kinds of false reporting of abuse by the children, in my experience, fall apart pretty quickly when they are false. You pick up pretty quickly that the child has been asked by most likely one of their parents, although it's not always the parents, but to report this. It's not something that they can sustain.
Or they got upset that Daddy took away their cell phone or whatever,
sometimes it comes
their
in.
allowance is cut down.
Yeah, for example, it might come in. Usually when, and I don't know if you correct me, Doctor, if I'm wrong. Many times it's when people are newly separated, younger kids. One side, depending on the gender, will say, the young child, because they're limited words, may say, Mommy or Daddy touched me here. Well, they probably did to help them maybe go into the bathroom. But now that recent separation has caused all these other things in the other side, and they say, well, how did he touch you? So they touched you over here, and then they start creating things. Somebody makes a report. Now CPS gets involved, Child Protective Services gets involved. So now you have somebody questioning the child. Then you have somebody like myself. In New York, we change it to AFC, Attorney for the Child. So you have somebody from my office maybe talking to the child. So now this child's had these words being thrown at them, and sometimes they can create that false memory. But as the doctor said, that in time you start picking up quick because they have no story. It's so jumbled up that there's no beginning to an end.
It becomes like it's like an over
Yeah,
interview.
There's no story. They're like, you touched me. Oh, so where were you? Oh, I don't remember. Certain things that should be significant aren't there.
Isn't there contamination, though, from interviewing one person and another and another and another and another? Isn't that something that becomes a problem?
Absolutely. Sometimes by the time maybe my office gets to talk to the child, they may have been interviewed by the parent that they go home to, the parent that's arguing with them, an aunt and uncle or somebody, and maybe CPS, like I said. But what is important is, I always feel, ask open-ended questions, right? And that's the important
There's a very
part.
good interviewing technique. I mean, there are people who are really trained to do this, and when you really think you have a sexual abuse case, that then you bring in the experts. I know I do.
Yeah.
I bring in people who are very skilled and trained at talking to a child.
I see a difference between taking an anatomically correct doll and asking a child, can you show me where you were touched, as opposed to, were you touched anywhere? Mm-hmm. I mean, one is telling you, you have to show me a part of your body you were touched.
So maybe they'll pick that.
Training, that must be an important component where you are training not only your new attorneys, but people. How do they have? Do they have to go to workshops? Our attorneys. We have attorneys.
We have 8 social workers on staff, and so the attorneys have to continue with their education. The social workers have to continue with their education, and we focus on, especially with the social, on the forensic aspect of it, and the attorneys. To get that information from child. But what we're trying to push our attorneys more and more on our staff is to utilize the social workers better, ask for expertise from forensic doctors, and not to tell the court what to do, but to guide us on what steps, because many of these cases have to be taken steps. One of the cases, you had asked a question earlier, if they had a child that's made a statement and then retracted. I always like to use this case as an example because a young lady who was being touched by the stepfather came to our office, and when I first get a case like that, I don't always like to do it myself. I bring in the forensic social worker from day one to establish a rapport with that individual if they're going to continue to meet, and also to help me ascertain things that I'm thinking of. How am I going to prosecute this case? But I need that other side that the doctor would provide, something like that. So when this young lady told me that she'd been touched, she had a story. When you had questions, she had backup. She goes, I even put it on a video. I gave it to this person. I spoke to this. It was full. Months later, she came in to tell me it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's very cold. And again, I had this social worker with me, and I asked her, do you believe it the first time or the second? She said the first time, and I said, so do I. Why? Because she had that story, right? And there was a reason why there was a motive for her to lie the second time. Because her relationship with her mother was breaking apart because her mother just married this gentleman.
Yeah.
She wanted back in the house.
Scenario. Yeah.
Right? She wanted back in the house. So that was motive for her to, I'm going to dismiss this even if I'm going to put myself in harm's way.
Okay. And Robin, obviously, as a psychologist, we need some expertise in this particular area.
But there is, I would say, concern that psychologists in our training, typically, we don't get a lot of training or academic classes or internships or postdoctoral fellowships in this area. This is, although they're more than there used to be, and there is, I would argue, more attention being paid to this. It's typically not part of our training. Now, I would say an exception.
We're looking at things like mandated reporters, which is a requirement, but obviously that's like a baseline. That's
I would say St. John's University, their clinical psych program is very good on this issue, on trauma and abuse, and I'm picking it up on so forth. But they're making that a central part of their academic training for those doctoral students. But I haven't seen that widespread or systematic. But just to your point a moment ago, there is really, to me, it's an extraordinary story. It's a book by Armstrong and Miller, and it's called A False Report. And it's the story of a young woman in the West who what it all boiled down to was her beloved parents said, "You have said that you were raped, and we feel terrible about it. But there is something about the way you're telling us this. It's a cry for help or attention. We understand there were things in your past maybe that..." But basically, they did not believe her. And they made her, really forced her, and they had a good relationship. There were no other factors that would maybe account for this, such as poverty or neglect or something of that sort. Go back to the police and say, and recount. They made her do this. You whatever's going on with you, we'll deal with it within the family, but you've got to go to recount this. So she did. And what happened was this rapist was a twisted person who taped his rapes and videoed them. And in the years ahead, they found the videotape of her rape. So that's how complicated these things can get. She felt that kind of pressure to recount when it in fact had happened. You see, these are the very complicated issues that occur around abuse and trauma and so forth, is where does the truth lie? And so that to me was a very good example. And absent the electronic evidence, it's sometimes we feel we don't know. Although I'd like to think we're getting better at picking up on when it's occurring and when it's not, if we work with a case long enough.
Let's hold that thought. We're going to take a momentary break now. And when we come back, I do want to talk about indicators of abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. And then towards the end of the show, I'm hoping that we can focus on suggestions and recommendations for parents so that they can pretty much know when, how to intervene, or what are some of the telltale signs and maybe, red flags. What are some of the indicia and indicators, and when they need to do something. So we'll be back in a moment, and we'll pick up with some of the indicators.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales, si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com.
We try to make the office more of a family type.
The office here is amazing. The staff here is amazing. Everybody makes you feel welcome. There's nobody who doesn't make you feel uncomfortable.
We do no-fault accidents. We do work-related slip and falls, major med, sports-related injuries. So we do a lot of different. We just don't treat just one type of individual. I want to treat the patient. I want the patient to get better and have a good experience in my office. It's not all about the money, it's about the patient getting better.
Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
Tribuna TV te invita a, si quieres ser el productor de tu propio programa de televisión, para así formar parte de la programación de Tribuna TV, rentando tu espacio en nuestra programación, como lo han hecho nuestros productores asociados. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-928-11, extensión 7, o visítanos en la web al www.tribunatv.us.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Okay, we're back after a short break. Oscar, could you please put the fourth slide? I wanted to start showing the viewers what some of the signs or indicators are of abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. We're going to start with the first slide. Indicators of abuse. We're looking at serious injuries, frequently appearing injuries. So, you see an injury over and over and over again. The changes in behavior, particularly destructive, aggressive, disruptive behavior. The flip side of that could be more passive, more withdrawn, emotionless, flat emotional behavior, fear of going home, fear of one or both parents, either or both parents. So those are indicators of abuse. Do you have anything to add to that, or this more or less covers that?
With very young children, unexplained injuries is always one, right, that nobody seems to know. And then accidents do happen, but when you have a series of unexplained injuries, especially with a child that can't speak or too young to speak, then those might be indicators.
Well, what about like the shaken baby? Is that
a
big? I mean, obviously dealing with babies, but
that's always difficult because you're putting in science and doctors' reports, and sometimes you can have conflicting doctors' reports because that trauma could have happened maybe at birth or some other situation, and it could be that a child is just the way they're born, certain parts of their makeup can also lead to something. It could be internal bleeding. They're unexplained at times, and so there's an assumption in the law that absent some other explanation that somebody did something.
Well, I want to open up what I think is an important area, and tú como Latino, you would certainly appreciate this, but when you're dealing with cultural differences, language barriers, I know that I work with many Hispanic patients, and I've seen incredible difficulty on the part of mothers who in some way are being singled out or targeted by school or by a doctor, and they're having difficulty expressing how the child got hurt. They're looking at cultural nuances that are different. Yes. And I think it's really something that's very, very important to raise, that there are, I think, cultural and language barriers are very significant.
Yeah, and economic. I used to defend those cases years ago, parents that, and I've had some where you know, they were not of minority background, but I had this situation where it was their economics that made them a target. They got to the hospital. They were low means, and immediately their baby was taken away by the county.
Yes.
And then I told my client, you know, this is crazy to say, you have a white baby, you might not get that baby back, because immediately that baby can be put into a pre-adoptive home. And it was mostly by their economic means.
I've seen cases where people they didn't have, you know, they had to move frequently because of undocumented status.
Sure.
They're not able to. They don't have insurance. They're not able to tend to the educational, health, learning needs of the child, or proper living quarters, and they're not bad people.
Right.
You know, yet they're being looked upon, and in some ways demonized and criminalized.
Well, and the law. You know, the law is supposed to be on their side. It's not just supposed to be for lack of economics, because these are things that government is supposed to assist with. You know, so it does occur.
Well, there's a dynamic that can take hold in court that is very troubling, because we go to our courts for justice, and the psychologists are there to help inform the court and provide understanding of what's going on. The lawyers are there to defend and to prosecute appropriately. And it's all set up to be a very good system that allows the truth to unfold. But when you get into abuse cases, some very complicated dynamics can kick in. And you have a lot of bias operating. And you have a number of assertions that are not true. And these cases can take on stereotypes. These cases can take on a life of their own, and have resulted in a whole movement to try to protect children in custody cases, where somehow, I mean, the statistics are staggering. The number of proven abusers. They've been, what's the word I'm looking for? They have been accused and found guilty of abuse, are being given custody of their children or allowed unsupervised time with their children. These are people who have been proven to be abusers. Now, what is going on in the court when that information is available to the court that's allowing that to occur? Now, there are the numbers on this I'm not going to mention any because I'm not quite sure how some of these statistics are derived, but there is enough documentation of this, enough books about it, and enough reports of it that there is some basis to it. This is the kind of thing that we're looking to address when we reform child custody. You know, how that is one issue that we're looking to.
Yeah. You know, what you're saying in terms of the courts not doing enough, one of the issues is that some of the cases, if a case starts off as a custody case, and then it should be a neglect or an abuse.
Yes, that gets
right. What happens is right now, if you follow the money, right? They would say follow the money. These days, there's a big mandate by the federal government to reunite families, which is a good thing because all the studies show that kids do better with their own families. However, we can't do that with kids that are severely abused. They've been severely abused. You know, you got to have some protection. So the pendulum has swung so much the other way that states are now given incentives. New York State has been given incentive to reduce the amount of kids in foster care. Again, that could be a good thing, but foster care is there for a reason, to protect those kids that in their home environments are not being protected.
But hasn't foster care also ballooned so much that you have to wonder the ability of the foster parents to take care of the foster children, and also the ones who are supposed to go out to make home visits, and how often
like I said, the
and
pendulum has
capable
swung
they
the other
are
way.
really doing that.
A lot of agencies have seen a reduction in their budgets, and there's more. They're providing
Huge caseloads.
Well, but they get so because the incentive is to get the child to somebody out of care, right? Sometimes back to people that have abused them, right? Because they're going to get a monetary amount.
Wouldn't kinship placement be a first shot?
It could be. But many times if they can't find, just like Doctor said, they're going to place them back with the abuser.
Well, this is the phenomenon I think that people are trying to document, and there have been some wonderful...
And I think it's on the rise.
Yeah, well, that's despite the work that's being done to try to bring this to the public's attention. It does seem to be a phenomenon that's on the rise. We're not protecting, the courts are not protecting the children in many instances, and that's what they're there for. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking to see, but we do see how abusers can prevail in these custody conflicts, and
and you see it, and especially with domestic violence abusers. They tend to, having my experience also worked in the criminal division in the domestic violence part. Some domestic abusers, what they'll do is they call the police first, right?
Yeah, that's
They
true.
make the report first, so that way they can get the order of protection. They can get this. They know, and they know the ways to control, and then they utilize the child.
Petitioner.
Yeah, okay. And then they utilize the child to punish the other side.
Yeah.
Oscar, can you put up the next slide? I just wanted to get another aspect of abuse we touched upon, but I wanted to talk about indicators of no, the one, Elantes, número 5. Right, indicators of sexual abuse. There's symptoms of sexually transmitted diseases, injury to the genital area, difficulty or pain, sitting, walking, sexually suggestive, inappropriate, promiscuous behavior, certainly not appropriate for the age. Mm-hmm. Age-inappropriate knowledge of sexual relations, and sexual victimization of other children. And
another one would be we've had cases where the young lady's pregnant.
Okay.
Because by age, we forget that by age we have the statutory rape laws. And so you have a 16-year-old that we know because she's with child.
And Oscar, the next one, so we can at least wrap with the slides, the one on the indicators of neglect. Here are some things such as malnourishment, listlessness, fatigue, the child that just seems apagado in Spanish, like the batteries run out, stealing, begging for food, perhaps even stealing, lack of personal care, hygiene, tattered clothes, clearly unbathed, and foul body odor, untreated medical needs or dental care, frequent absences from school, or unexplained, unauthorized latenesses. Child is left unattended or without supervision.
Fighting. Fighting in school.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I did want to ask as a hypothetical, because we're talking. It's not necessarily a custody issue, but as a hypothetical in terms of visitation. If you have, say, you have parents and they've never been married, they've never really been together, but they have a child that's approximately 6 or 7 months old. The child has always been in the care of the mother, and the father has shown interest, has wanted to be a part of the child's life, and is sort of now demanding increased time, including overnights, but significantly wants to take the child away out of state for a week or 2 weeks. Is this something that should be handled or looked at? Is this a red flag? Is this a sure, by all means do it, no problem? The child's never been away from the mother for that type of period, the right period. So this is a hypothetical I just wanted to raise, because I've not dealt with children this young where you actually had both parents wanting to be part of the child's life, but this issue about how much time and how much physically the child who's always been with the mother needs to have the mother there, and what effect that might have on a child, if any.
Yeah, I would say, Roy, in each case you have to look at each case individually. Where is in this case, the dad, where is his request coming from? What's going on that he would want that? Because given that mother has been the primary caretaker, it would seem to me 6 months would be young for that kind of abrupt separation. But that's controlling for all other factors, which we don't know here. That would be young for dad, unless they're living together and dad's right there all the time. They're not, right? That's part of this hypothetical.
Right.
They're not. I would say 6 months would be young for that, assuming everything else is equal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and like Dr. said, I think every case is different. One of the factors that might lend into it is the mother breastfeeding, right? That bonding, it can be tough for the child for 2 weeks, which is such a long time for a child to.
Yeah.
Like you said, why is the father wanting to take this time?
Yeah.
If he's got a good reason. I have my mother in Jersey or my mother in Virginia would like to see the child,
Or he picks up on the mother. Maybe mom's a little tired. Mm-hmm. Maybe she needs to spend time with her family because there was a death in the family. And would you like me to take the baby for a week? And we're going to go down and see my family and so forth.
What's the motivation?
What's the motivation? You don't know.
Yeah, because
maybe that would be a
absolutely. Because why should the because you got to start. Too many times parents they're looking at themselves instead of saying, well, what is good for the child? Even though everybody throws around the term best interest, but they really mean self-interest. What's good for the child? Well, to have both parents as much as possible. Yeah. Right?
Putting this case aside, but if you have a situation where their parents are separated and say as a hypothetical, a father's looking to have more time with the child, and there's a court involved. I mean, there's a process. Obviously, sure. Is the father competent, I guess, or able to spend time with the child? They start looking for it. Isn't there sort of like a step-by-step thing? Initially, day visits, and then maybe an overnight.
Well, sometimes they do that,
and then increased time. Things like that.
It might depend because you can have that same scenario where they separated, but while they were together, maybe mom worked nights, and dad was there at night. Yeah. So that's why you got to look at the nuances and see that if dad had the ability and did care for the child at certain circumstances, did dad at times take the child to the doctor without mom because she's working? We've had cases where mom's the breadwinner, right? We always so many times assume it's just one way, and which at times I've seen it actually work against women, right?
Yes.
Because people will say, how come she doesn't want to be home? Well, she does want to be home, but she happens to earn more money. You have expenses. So people fall into that trap, too. It's like, well, why wouldn't she want to be the person? Well, maybe he can be the caretaker,
I see something. I'm sort of grinning a bit because I see this so often in cases where I'm looking at hardships, at potential deportations, and you have all of a sudden, what's a parent going to do, working, being left with 3 kids, and you've got the main bread earner now is unavailable or picked up all of a sudden by ICE, and nobody knows where the parent is, and of course, what we saw with the zero tolerance policy, where the government was initiating the separations, and what sort of trauma that can leave behind. What is the traumatic impact to children when there are these kinds of issues, custody issues, abuse kinds of issues? What are the ramifications, long term, if any, ramifications that exist? Because obviously you get a solution at one point in time. There's a legal solution at some point in time, but it doesn't end.
Yeah.
It doesn't end.
Life goes on.
Yeah, the legal solution.
Life goes on, and you still have a child.
Just by itself, is inadequate, right? Because, for instance, if you get two folks that are fighting and always arguing, and they come to court, they kind of settle these things legally, who gets what, but they know what their visitation times are. But every time one parent's 5 minutes late, they're calling, they're harassing. So that parent is tense. So what happens to the child? And anxiety, tension builds. And
what happens 5 years later? They're developing their own relationships, and
what happens is sometimes I see them back. I see them back as a juvenile delinquent. A PINS situation, person needed supervision.
Yeah. The children who get caught up in these custody conflicts, they are often, some pretty complicated dynamics can kick in. Remember the Wissing case where the she wasn't that little, but she was 10, 11, 12 years old. This is tough stuff. She with the father, joined him in abusing the mother, harshly, physically abusing the mother, and chose to stay with the father, and the judge had to overrule that. You get, sometimes they think, is it an identity with the aggressor? Is it a Milgram effect, from the Milgram study? What's going on? Are there attached traumatic bonding, all of that?
Or the siblings may start fighting one with the other if they sense preferential treatment with one, or
all of these.
One goes to the father, one goes to the mother.
All of these variables have to be considered, and their own, perhaps, depression, anxiety, trauma related to what's going on. But also, if you've got parents who are themselves troubled, perhaps, it has been shown in very good study by Holtzworth Monroe that in custody conflicts, most of the people, when it's a serious custody conflict, and there's an evaluator brought in, and there's an attorney for the children and so forth, most of them fall into some category of an affect dysregulated person. They have a personality disorder of sorts. And there can be a genetic component to that. So this is something that can exist in the family. Some personality traits that can exist in the family. But it's a complicated thing, because I'm dealing with a case with this. This is really in evidence right now, where the child also is very sensitive and gets upset very easily and lashes out. But that's where a good evaluator, if they can pick up on what's going on, can minimize the effect of that, help the child develop coping skills. We help those tendencies that would make a child more aggressive or anxious or angry, lessen those with good therapy, pick up on it, get good therapy in the intervention in there, and really address these issues.
We only have a few minutes left, so you'll all forgive me if we don't take another commercial break. We only have a few minutes left. So what I did want to do is both of you, if you could give just 2 minutes worth each of potential recommendations to the viewers of things to be on the lookout, things to be careful about pertaining to their relationships with their children.
Pertaining to their children?
Yeah, what are some things to be on the lookout for? I mean, like absenteeism from school, covering your arms in the middle of summer and it's 90 degrees outside. You wonder what your kid's doing. What kinds of things or suggestions might you have for parents that are potential red flags or indicators that something's going on and they need to be careful and need to consider that they need to talk to their child or seek professional help?
Well, with older kids, I would say you want to see who their peer groups are, and that would be something you'd want to focus in on.
So who are they hanging out with?
Who were they hanging out with?
If like maybe they have new friends that are, maybe a different type of a crowd, or they're staying out later, or they're not accounting for their time, or they're becoming more verbally aggressive to the parents at home.
That's something you would want to look at. Who are they hanging out with and what are those kids up to? Is this the swim team that is involved in pretty healthy activities, or do we have the kids who are getting together with drugs and drinking in the woods in the local park? I mean, what's going on that way? How are their grades doing? Things like that in high school.
Performance in school.
Performance in school.
Any significant academic changes, lapses in school performance.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
but then younger kids.
Absolutely, and I think it starts with the younger.
Yeah.
Because too often we see people trying to fix a young teenager, 13, 14 years old, and meanwhile, for the past 7, 8 years of their life, before that, when they're young, things are usually okay.
You're exactly right.
Right.
Yep.
So that in-between time is crucial. One, right, communication. And I always find that every time I've asked, my own little study, right, when I've asked PINS kids, persons in need of supervision, or JD kids, juvenile delinquent kids that are charged with crimes, what do you do besides school?
Yeah.
I gotta say, about 90% of the time, they say nothing.
Right.
That's a problem.
So lack of hobbies, lack of interest.
Something. But where does that come from? Too many times parents just say, go out and go do something.
Okay.
No,
Well, what about the addiction? I call it an addiction. The addiction to social media and the iPhone and texting and interacting with peers and taking videos of everything and bullying.
I have twin 13-year-olds, so I'm at that stage, right?
Yeah.
And but what I started to do 6, 7, 8 years ago, right? That's what I said. It starts earlier. I got them involved in sports. I've always enjoyed sports, and also encourage music, the arts, anything, right?
Yeah.
Because what does that do?
So involvement.
But involvement, not just involvement, but that constant communication. So I help coach. I talk to them. Even when they want to shut down, I don't let them shut down. So when they are using social media, I allow it, because I'm actually watching their time that they're doing other activities.
You're watching. See, but that's important. You're watching.
You have to.
You're not letting them.
You have to be involved. And
you're not letting them to their own devices.
And it is hard on parents, because there's so much pressure on parents.
Yes.
Life is expensive. Everybody's working hard. There are demands, many demands on their time, but they've got to keep those kids first.
But I think parents also need to be aware of what the schools are doing and be involved with the schools and communicate with the teachers. Find out what extracurricular activities exist, if there's any after-school programs,
there's one other
sports, religious activities, things like that, and encourage and get that and communicate. You need to talk. Parent has to talk to teacher, to doctor, to dentist, to professionals. You go to the doctor, you talk to the doctor.
And Roy, there's one thing too I should mention. I don't like to end on this depressing note, but we do see in high school, but particularly in college, all of a sudden, it's usually a young woman wants to come home from school. I can't quite finish the semester. Or at high school, all of a sudden you see a change in their behavior.
Sexual abuse.
Yeah, sadly, there may be that. So, look, I'm so sorry that that's so prevalent in our society, but it's out there. And we parents have to just be aware of it.
We didn't touch on issues that would be like for another show. Things like, within family abuse. We didn't touch that. That would be like another show.
Right.
But but I think I certainly I'm big on the educational component, and I think that parents need to know the names of the teachers, the names of their kids' friends, phone numbers. Kids should have a phone number with limited access. If you tell the kid come home at 10 p.m., the kid should be home at 10 p.m.
But even the game that they're all playing right now, Fortnite, I've played that with my boys so I can communicate. So then they come to me and say, Daddy, have you seen this on and their friends say, oh, you play? Yeah. Because then I'm listening to who they're playing with. Is it age appropriate? Are they playing with the kids their same age?
Right.
You have to
and what are the peers doing?
No, you're right. You're good, Dad.
You need to know who your friends are, and by all means, look at your kids' performance in school. Look at their report cards. It's my understanding now that report cards are all on computers now. Yes. There's no excuse not to look at the report card, or to look at the grades, and to look at the homework and ask them, did you do your homework, and help them with it. And for some reason, there's a language barrier. You still can ask the child, show me, and enséñame, do something with me. There's got to be a lot of communication. I think we're sort of coming to an end. Oscar, do I have any time left? Do I have another hour, or how am I doing? ¿Me queda tiempo?
Estamos a las 10 ya, o sea,
Okay, so alrighty. So what I did want to do, I think we gave a lot of suggestions to parents, but I think it's important if you see these things, and I think if you're involved with your child, you won't be seeing these things. Yeah. But if you do see things, you moved, you're in a new environment, a new school, you're going to have to anticipate that there's going to be emotional, behavioral changes. If you have different aged children, the siblings, this one may get along better in school than this one. There may be resentment. There may be a separated family, and the older sibling feels resentful that he or she has to do more of the parenting or co-parenting with the adult parent. So these are things that you have to anticipate and expect, and appreciate, and you have to be able to talk and communicate. There's no shortcut for talking and knowing things, but if there are problems, you do have to reach out. And I did want to thank Robin and Jorge. Can you put their contact information up, Oscar? Because these are experts. If you want to contact them,
only the numbers.
I wanted you to be aware of how you can reach them. If you have questions, you can reach through La Tribuna TV. I'm also accessible in offices and on the internet. You could probably do a Google search of both Rosario and Robin Lynch, and you'll come up with some interesting things. But I did want to make available their contact information and phone numbers if you have any further questions. You have that?
No, I put the on demand. Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that'll be the show's being recorded live, I think, on YouTube. It'll be available tomorrow on Tribuna TV, on Vimeo, Facebook, I'm not sure what else, all of these platforms. But you can certainly, since it's recorded, you can pause it and print the slides. You can look at them, review them. Feel free to contact any of us. And again, next week we will have Dr. Antonio Puente. We'll be dealing with a very sensitive yet super important topic, dealing with tragedies, natural kinds of tragedies as well as human-made disasters and tragedies, including hate crime. So, Robin, muchas gracias, niña. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy.
Jorge,
thank you.
So, when are we doing basketball this weekend? I have to go back to my class on parental alienation. Pick up a little bit. I was joking, by the way. I know very well what parental alienation is, but I didn't want to throw that in. So, thank you all. I hope that you got some benefit from this show, and I'll see you all hopefully next week.